Straight ahead. That's a group of male waterbucks. So let's keep noise to a minimum so that we can come more closer to them. Look at the buffaloes up there. Look.
Ooh, the big one.
In the heart of Africa's Great Lakes region, Rwanda has turned its focus to high-end wildlife tourism to develop its economy. It charges entrance fees of around 100 euros for foreigners, offering paid activities and luxury hotels. Since 2010, Akagera Park has been under the administration of a South African NGO called African Parks, known for its commercial management of the environment and its military-inspired methods. Across Africa, Akagera has become a model for the commercialization of nature. It is also seen as an economic success in the eyes of the Rwanda Development Board.
In 2010, we were generating not more than 200,000 US dollars. Today, the park is generating close to 5 million US dollars.
In the name of protecting wildlife, African Parks, the WWF, and many other organizations are following in its footsteps. But behind these successes lies a tragedy invisible to tourists. Vast territories are being emptied of their original inhabitants. Displaced from the forests of the Congo region or the plains of Kenya, these vulnerable communities often find themselves at the gates of the parks, watching visitors pass by.
Very sad when they take photo and they just go and they go and take those animals and we don't pay them, they pay us.
In the face of these injustices, increasing numbers of activists are speaking out against what is known as fortress conservation. This Kenyan environmental activist has condemned what he calls green colonialism.
The most effective land grabbing tool in Africa is a rhino. You will go and put it in some place and you'll get a license to fence that land. You'll get a license for firearms to shoot anybody who comes close to that land. And you will also get funding to maintain your control of that land.
Today, animal protection is no longer the only pretext for evicting local communities. These ecosystems can now generate carbon credits and potentially bring in tens of millions of euros. This is an investigation into a model of nature management where money seems to take first place in the animal kingdom. Long hunted for their horns, there are now only 5,000 rhinos left in Africa. In Rwanda, the species had disappeared in the 2000s, but African Parks brought in 48 specimens from South Africa and released them in Akagera. A $2 million operation that these guards oversee every day.
These are browsing marks of black rhinos. This is where black rhinos have been feeding on. It looks like it's a machete who cut this tree. They are moving toward to the top there.
Each animal is fixed with a small transmitter so it can be tracked. Along with lions, elephants, buffalo and leopards, rhinos are one of the big five. The 5 animals most sought after by tourists.
Those are rhinos. They're up there. Can you see them?
The NGO and the Rwandan authorities are so proud of this reintroduction that they are planning to bring in 70 more rhinos.
We put much effort in protecting the habitat, not only the habitat of rhino, but also a whole park, just to ensure there is no wire snares, there is no poachers to set those wire snares.
In addition to these armed patrols, there is an electric fence, 120 kilometers long. Since it was taken over by African Parks, Akagera has been transformed into an immense fortress.
Hello, Peter Walamte.
This system is supplemented by motion detecting cameras, which record the movement of animals, but also those of humans. In accordance with Rwandan law, African Parks has a zero-tolerance policy towards intruders.
These came yesterday. A rhino with her calf. We also have this. So this is an intruder. It was at 5 a.m. Usually what we do with this kind of picture, we just save it for future references. If he was like maybe caught, it can be used as an evidence.
What's the microphone? As long as you step in the park, if you're not a tourist or a staff, you're a poacher. I was educated, there's a barrier. If I go beyond that barrier, I am already committing crime.
In Rwanda, poachers who are caught are regularly given heavy sentences of up to 7 years in prison. Traps and weapons are kept as trophies in what looks like a poaching museum. After working in various parks, Ladislas Ndairiwe joined Akagera in 2013.
Vous avez des lances. Vous avez des belles lances là.
For the current director, this year has marked the inauguration of the fence and the beginning of a relentless war against hunting and fishing.
Sur 10 ans, c'est tout ce qu'on a. On a sorti du parc. Vous avez les collets métalliques, les motos, les vélos, les pirogues. Tout ça, c'est ramassé. Et maintenant, je pense que le parc est vraiment, en termes de braconnage, on a très peu de braconnage pour le moment. Ouais.
This heavy-handed approach to nature conservation is perfectly in line with the authoritarianism of Rwandan President Paul Kagame, who has been in power since 1994. The Rwandan government and African Parks have signed a 20-year partnership agreement, entrusting the NGO with the management of the park as a private enterprise. With 345 employees and 56,000 visitors last year, the director hopes to break even soon.
On s'assoit tous ensemble pour voir comment on atteint cet objectif et ça, tout passe à travers l'argent. Donc il faut vraiment bien faire nos calculs pour qu'on puisse arriver à un objectif en fin d'année. Et le but, c'est d'être complètement sustainable, autonome. Devenir autonome. C'est un modèle unique, je pense. Moi, j'ai fait la conservation, comme je vous ai dit, ça fait maintenant presque 30 ans. C'est le seul endroit où j'ai vu que ça fonctionnait.
The authorities are so pleased with this collaboration that the NGO has been given a second site to manage in the west of the country. Nyungwe National Park. This equatorial forest is home to several species of monkey, such as colobus monkeys and chimpanzees, threatened by poaching and illegal mining. African Parks is applying the same formula here as in Akagera: entrance fees, tourist attractions, and of course, armed patrols. It's impossible to fence off this forest, but here too, humans are prohibited from entering. African Parks relies on these men to enforce the law. Most of them are former small game hunters. They role-play as poachers during their training.
Gira vuba wasanga ngo tudahura n'aba banyagwa enda funga hano mbyikore. Ashireho uyu nguyu kabisa.
Aro muyobozi.
Mwishe nise. Mwishe se.
Bafite kwahebyo gose. Nifumberi.
Bafite nise.
These reformed poachers now earn 37 euros a month. It's not much, but in this remote part of Rwanda, there are no other jobs.
Bitubaho keshi harimo n'abaducika ariko benshi turabafata. nafata umuntu nko itariki ya 20 z'uku kwezi.
Banjyana kuri gereza baramfunga. Maze icyo gihe barankatiye aho mfunguriwe bita mfata umwanzuro yuko ntazasubira muri pariki. Bari bankatiye amezi 6 narayakoze. Uhashize kuko nahise mara nk'amezi 7 bahita bangaja ikorenja bahita bampa akazi
65.
In these isolated villages, the forest is used for both heating and food. Game is often the only source of protein. To meet these needs, African Parks supports around 30 cooperative farms. Like this pig farm, which opened a few months ago. Or this mushroom farm, one of the most profitable projects.
This one is grow enough to be harvested. Ni business nziza cyane. Impamvu ifite isoko, abakiriya barahari benshi kandi byera vuba. Umusaruro wabyo uboneka vuba. Nyuma y'icyumweru kimwe turasarura, nyuma y'icyumweru kimwe tukongera tugasarura ndetse hafi ya buri munsi.
Rwanda has the highest population density in Africa, and access to land is a sensitive issue. On the last day of filming, we went to one of these villages. The homes here have electricity thanks to money from tourists. But it didn't take long for us to meet farmers who were not happy. The Rwandan authorities are creating a 100-meter buffer zone around the park here, on fields cultivated by villagers. 1,200 hectares are to be planted with acacia trees. The directors of Akagera claim this is to prevent clashes between humans and animals. Workers have already started digging holes for the trees.
abandi barimo barakora twe turicaye nta nicyo tuzi n'akantu hera imyumbati baracukuye baracukura ruhande baracukuye nibambwe basabye ko nyivanamo ari hose baracukuye uko mbyumva ubwo ikibazo narangije kucyumva ushaka kumbaza twebwe nta muyobozi wigeze aza ngo atuganirize uretse kubona baza n'amashini ngo ntimwongere gukoreramo ntabwo bigeze batubwira niba bazaduhingurane cyangwa se niba bazaduha amafaranga y'imperekeza nta kintu tuzi.
After filming for around 15 minutes, we were interrupted by workers in charge of planting acacia trees.
hari abakozi bo ku karere bari bagiye kuza muri ibibazo by'ubu butaka bwanyu nyine ubwo nagira ngo mutagenda hano nyine niyo mpamvu narindi kukuse.
The Akagera communications manager had been alerted. He called our driver to ask us to leave the premises.
Il dit c'est interdit pour causer avec les habitants sans permission.
African Parks is afraid of bad publicity, which could jeopardize its subsidies. With an annual budget of over 120 million euros, the NGO manages 23 parks across the continent. In Paris, we met a Dutch investigative journalist. After more than 3 years of investigating African parks, Olivier van Beemen has been threatened with legal action aimed at blocking the publication of his book. His book condemns, in particular, the links between environmentalism and the European aristocracy. Today, he is seeing the French translation of his book for the first time.
Salut Olivier.
Salut Thomas, comment ça va?
Ça va bien.
Plaisir de te revoir.
Ben oui. Regarde, le bébé est arrivé.
Ah, waouh! J'aime bien cette image. Subtilement, on voit le prince Harry de dos qui a un éléphant qu'il tire par la corde. Et ça montre, à mon avis, un peu le côté maladroit de toute cette entreprise African Parks.
Donc tu as les deux, ok.
Oui.
As stated on their website, Prince Harry is a member of the board of directors of African Parks, after having been its honorary president for 6 years. Olivier has focused on the organization's co-founder, Paul Ventnor van Vlissingen, who died in 2006. This Dutch billionaire, who was passionate about hunting, made his fortune in oil and retail.
This is the castle in the center of the Netherlands from where African Parks ran its operations. Imagine, I heard stories from witnesses, you have this Paul van Vlissingen there going over the map of Africa, looking for possibilities for expansion, and it's really like in the colonial days, basically. He has a history in hunting. You see that many conservationists actually have a history in hunting. Conservationists in Africa, when they started to care about nature, it was because they were fearing that there weren't enough animals left to hunt. So you see that there's a Dutch prince, which was a friend of his as well, Prince Bernhard. And he's one of the founders of WWF. He was a big-time hunter as well. This guy also hunted elephants.
Historically, European hunters are the main culprits behind the disappearance of large African mammals. The first protected areas were often hunting reserves, from which local communities were excluded. This philosophy continues today throughout the continent. We went to Congo-Brazzaville, this time not to the parks themselves, but to the bordering areas. In the north of the country, there is only one paved road. It is mostly used by trucks carrying timber for export. We are accompanied by Rufin Mikotsi, a Baka activist who works with Survival International. For the past 10 years, this NGO has been documenting violations of the rights of the Baka, a hunter-gatherer people who used to live in the heart of the forest. Forced to flee logging operations and protected areas, the Baka people find themselves living on the side of the road. Here, African Parks and the WWF have been accused of using the same forceful methods. We came here to meet a man who says he was tortured in the forest. This father explains how 5 years ago he was caught by guards while harvesting forest honey, a source of sugar for Baka children.
Tumba de boziango bole. Na bole me jangi la dambe sina bolangi la wala tumba ta boya boziango bole. Ezu ka bozia kwambe tango bole. Na lo de ma go ta bele ne. Ga dongo kuma ave mo do ka o mo de bele o de bo ga du tu angati ba bo ga ka de so ba.
La peau m'a belle. Voilà, il y a les cicatrices, c'est beau. Il y a les cicatrices. Telles qu'ici. Voilà, ça a été une grosse plaie. La même chose ici, au niveau des épaules. Et ça sûrement c'est la ceinture, la ceinturon.
Pina la give ma go kena bela ma mo pase go ko bele do ma go kena bele ya pe afre ke ma go chiba na ga pe ti o do ma go kena nivo ke o bela de jobo ya a ro ma do le city te ma de gote.
Since then, this former nomad says he's been forced to settle and now survives off of farming. All along this road, the Baka people tell similar stories. Arbitrary arrests, forced displacement, sometimes at the hands of eco-guards, sometimes the police.
Watumbanda be wakoto. Wamwabe bon. Dika itene, nga dika itene bonda entel e bien d'aller. Il faut sekenda ko pour que ndete musinda na toto nakbi.
This WWF eco-guard confirmed these accounts of forced evictions. But this young Baka man, who wanted to remain anonymous, this violence is compounded by ethnic prejudice. He accuses, in particular, older guards who are members of the dominant Bantu ethnic group.
Ils torturaient des gens, ils tapaient, ils brillaient même les compléments de trucs. Leur culture était quoi? Leur culture était seulement de torturer, de menacer. Leur culture était, si tu te trouves avec de l'argent, ils prennent ça. Quand je pensais que vraiment, quand ils torturaient des Baka, ce n'était pas bien. Un être humain, comment vous puissiez le torturer? Ça me choquait au cœur.
The young man says that these guards were dismissed. These human rights violations prompted the European Union in 2019 to suspend its funding for the WWF project in the region. Today, the violence has decreased, but the forest remains off-limits to the Baka people. The authorities have introduced hunting permits for small game. But as these permits come at a price, only the wealthier Bantu people can afford to buy them. Like these hunters on motorcycles we saw on the road and asked to speak to. To them, we were potential buyers, so these men had no problem showing us their morning catch.
Qu'est-ce que c'est ça?
C'est le singe.
Et même le singe, c'est autorisé?
Oui, ça c'est autorisé.
Ok. Et vous faites ça beaucoup, la chasse?
Mais il n'y a pas de boulot. Non, en fait, on vit qu'à base de ça.
This is known as bushmeat. These Bantu hunters sell it in small towns surrounding the parks. Although this meat is cheaper than pork or chicken, it remains unaffordable for the Baka community.
La viande ortilobe rouge.
Elle est grande?
Oui.
With no income, seen as second-class citizens in their villages, the Baka people are seeing their traditions disappear.
Tous ceux-là, ce sont mes enfants. Tous les enfants là.
At almost 60 years old, Dot Bigio Amal is saddened to see the younger generation unable to recognize animals, fruits, or medicinal plants, as they don't go with their parents into the forest.
Tu vas attendre au moins la pierre, tu vois. Lorsque moi, il va au moins tuer au moins la viande, tu vois. Bon, si on vous n'amène pas en forêt, qu'est-ce que vous allez connaître? Bon, quand il va y avoir belé à wagner. Si on est encore en vie, maintenant on nous libère la forêt, ça ne peut pas se perdre. Parce que les enfants là, on va les initier. On va les dire, regarde ça, ça soigne ça. Regarde ça, ça fait ceci. Regarde ça, ça fait cela. Bon, si la forêt est bloquée, il va connaître ça comment? On peut parler par la bouche, mais il faut qu'il voit des choses. Il fait l'expérience. Comme chez vous en France, ça c'est notre ville. Parce que c'est là. Nous vivons en base de la forêt.
Across the entire continent, the same tragedies are repeating themselves. The most vulnerable populations, those with the smallest carbon footprint, are being forced to abandon their way of life. Mordecai Ogada is Kenyan. This ecology professor has taught in the United States. He denounces the prejudice of Westerners who still perceive indigenous peoples as a threat to nature.
With all due respect to all my American friends and colleagues, I will not take environmental guidance from an American, because they finished the bison and they finished the passenger pigeon. We still have elephants. There is no African wildlife species that's more important than African people. We must have that principle. And then we must recognize the role of African people in conserving their wildlife. So we must learn from local communities and add value or improve what they're doing wherever we can. But we should not come and take land away and say we are teaching them about conservation.
Yet this is what is happening in northern Kenya. Here, the Maasai, Samburu, and Borana tribes of herders have always grazed their herds alongside wild animals. But for the past decade, an NGO called NRT, which stands for Northern Rangelands Trust, has been selling carbon credits. The NGO has sold pollution rights to Netflix and British Airways in the name of fighting against desertification, which it claims is caused by livestock. In this pilot reserve, it is now the NRT representative who determines the movements of the herds.
So we are actually at the end of the dry season, but normally it could have been raining by now. Like you could have seen the green grass sprouting by now. This is a really bare grounds, and you can see this is hard soil. So you can see it's already creating a hard cap, and nothing grows down there.
Alex Lekailali's job is to preserve grasslands, which regenerate with the first rains and capture carbon from the air.
This one, it's more softer. We call it lanana. Yeah. And then we have, this one is kind of grass, but this is the other one. It's called Lonoro. I think gravis definitely must have grass on it. So these are the two species that cattle really like them. The soft one and this one.
Every 2 months, the Samburu herders move their herds to fallow grasslands.
Yeah.
Behind this seemingly virtuous model lies the same struggle for control of the land. On paper, NRT doesn't own anything, but the leaders of 14 communities have entrusted it with the management of their herds and their territory. In exchange, the NGO provides water and medicine for the livestock with funds from carbon credits. This is an abstract mechanism for these herders, especially since in their language, the words carbon and wind are very similar. By monetizing an ancestral process on the financial markets, NRT claims to have pocketed 23 million euros from the first sale of carbon credits in 2022. Once operating costs were deducted, this reserve was allocated a budget representing less than 1% of the sale. Part of this was used to fund the running of the secondary school. Here, students received a grant of 175 euros. This covers half of their annual tuition fees.
How many of you have ever received bursary for carbon credits? By show of hands.
NRT claims it does not make a profit. And yet, this nebulous group of 43 reserves controls nearly 10% of Kenya's territory and sells everything from handbags to luxury safaris. We took the opportunity to meet with NRT management at the annual Pastoral Culture Festival. This event is so important that the Kenyan president made the trip. Dressed in the traditional attire of nomadic shepherds, William Ruto even broke into a few dance steps. Here, environment and wildlife tourism have become huge markets. Each reserve defends its chosen species. And NRT has one of the biggest stands at the festival. Its board of directors includes many members of the Kenyan elite, scientists, politicians, and business people who pride themselves on already being among the world's biggest sellers of carbon credits.
NRT works through the conservancies, and so we bring back the traditional way of rangelands management, but combining with scientifically proven practices that community members are part of that development process. Therefore, we are bringing back more grasses, reducing bare areas. We are bringing back, a life that pastoralists aspire to get, for a decent living.
On paper, NRT seems to be a tremendous success. Yet more and more people are questioning their methods. At the end of a dirt road, a 10-hour drive from Nairobi, revolt is in the air. These Borana herders accuse NRT of having deprived them of their grazing rights to create 2 new reserves in 2021. Hussein Jatani Ali claims that the NGO has pitted the tribes against each other to achieve its ends.
lubbuta sodaanne jennaan nulleen baqanne atachiik baqanne jumtaan cafatana duunne am diidi cerraba sun marqaba laf marqabtaan sodaa lubbuu suniifuyyu akkasii nam laf sunuu yoo aan seer dhabicha kan akkasitti farguu jira karaa sun nam dubbiilleen kootini jirtu waan isiitu buufatuu lammin bee
3 years ago, Hussein and 164 other representatives of this Muslim community took NRT to court. With the help of lawyers from the capital, the plaintiffs are demanding that the reserves be dismantled and the eco-guards withdrawn. Traditionally, semi-nomadic tribes in Kenya own land not individually, but collectively. In order to create its reserves, NRT should have obtained the signatures of all the clan's chiefs. But the clans claim the NGO used frontmen who usurped their titles.
Akkuma reefu nu jenne wanni kunini warri amma seenyi kaayisiin baansun wardiqa war beesin keessa guuranii beese kennanii fi kubbaala jedhanii beesin keessa guuranii jedhiin.
Inni income. Warrumaa suruyyuu guyyaa gaseedayyuu sirkaal kentumme kaadamee warri tumme warra administration DCDO alafu ardano jurutam name charge chifa bakarti gatum yani so warika nufin u karachi gara warra to ke wolinjira wandu ke wolinjira warika yawa kanga dude warkan tumyan kara gartinu leni afa baqafanne ibke kan himach fon gowani.
One of these reserves is called Cherab. When it was created, the recruitment of guards and the purchase of vehicles were partly financed by the French Development Agency. In Nairobi, the director and her Kenyan colleague welcomed us and defended their choices. France and the European Union have made carbon credits a priority in order to achieve their environmental goals.
It's important that the courts and the judicial processes are well followed and implemented according to the laws of Kenya. On AFD side, what we look at is the participation of the local communities and the concerns that they may have and how these are managed by NRT.
So for the moment, you are happy with the way that NRT has been dealing with these issues?
Yes, NRT has conducted several meetings with local communities, usually before starting projects, and it doesn't mean that there are no challenges.
A few weeks after this interview, the Kenyan courts declared their verdict. The 2 reserves, including the one in Cherab, were declared illegal, and all developments must be dismantled. NRT has appealed the decision. But for the nomadic herders, this is a first victory that could set a precedent in Kenya. Across the continent, there is hope that environmental protection can go hand in hand with respect for human rights.